In this video, I'm going to walk through my development process and code for an LLM Judge Agreement app that I created using FastHTML. This app is used to either agree or disagree and or leave comments for each of the 350 LLM Judge scores that I have for my different tiny model completions. So the first version that I'm showing here is very basic, and this is how I started it, just to get a sense of everything working correctly. So I have a CSV with all of my data. This has the prompt, the completion, the category, the criteria text, and then the LLM Judge score and explanation. And I'm going to use pandas to load that CSV into a data frame. And in my first iteration, I'm passing a ID parameter to the index, subtracting 1 because Python index starts with 0, and then I'm indexing into the data frame, grabbing the row, and just printing a title and the row itself. So this is what we see on the left-hand side. We see all of our data in a single paragraph, and I just really like starting here because it lets me know the shape and structure of my data, and that gives me a sense of what I'm going to do with it. So that's the first iteration. The second iteration is adding a data class for each row. And what this data class includes is basically a single field that I can access for each one of the columns in my data frame. So I have ID, category, prompt, completion, text, which is the criterion text, the score, which is a 0.0, 0.5, or 1.0 value, and then an explanation that the LLM Judge provided for their score. And all that I do is now I have an underscore row, which indexes into the data frame. And then I pass each of the fields, or each of the columns, to the parameters of row, and I'm printing that row. So now, if I start this file, it should nicely structure, well, not so nicely, but at least it should structure all of the information now into this row class. So I have my ID, category, prompt, completion, and so on. So still not pretty, but now I have something that I can more easily format. So that's our second step. The next step is now formatting this so it looks pretty and it looks readable. So my index doesn't change so far. I have the same underscore row and row. What I am doing now is I'm patching the row class with a custom dunder ft method. And anything that has a custom dunder ft method, when it's rendered, FastHTML will follow what's in the dunder ft method to render that class. So how I want to render this class is I want to have a div which has a heading, which is the category of the prompt, and then another div which has the prompt, completion, criterion, score, and explanation. And this is everything just in one column, pretty straightforward. So all I have to do is define this. I still am just passing row, but now this should format it in a much more prettier way. So if we run agree2.py, great. Now I have everything that I need, like in terms of content. And now I can start to see like what my app is going to look like. So I have prompt, completion, criterion, score, explanation. So far so good. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out the creation of the row from index, and I'm going to put it into a class or a route called item. I don't know if this is strictly necessary, but when I was working with Claude on my first app, this is what it did, and I was copying basically what I did in that first app. Plus, I kind of like having index just very simple so I can see at a high level how my page is structured. But I don't know, maybe there's another way to do this. So all I'm doing here is I'm just copy pasting what was in the index handle to this item handler. And then what I'm doing here is I'm adding the ID at the top, then a horizontal rule, and then the row. And it works the same way. It still takes a parameter with an integer value. And my data class and the dunderFT method are the same. So this is just a little bit of reorganizing, but doing it as a separate step so I can make sure that it works okay. All right, so now here's my index. So just to show how this works, I can pass different ID parameters. So I pass 200, so this goes to the 200 item. I can go 1247, and it goes to that item. So as you can see, like the functionality of navigation that I want, I can manually do it here. I can either go back one, I can go forward, I can go to whatever ID that I want. And so that's what I'm going to implement next is some navigation buttons. So that takes us to this file. So this is now the 5th iteration of the code. Everything else is untouched. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a previous button and I'm going to add a forward button. Previous is the text that displays on the button, as is forward. The get method that gets called, it goes to item 2 and it passes as the ID either 1 or ID minus 1, whichever is maximum. So this basically just avoids negative IDs. Another way to handle this is you could also use the modulo operator, so it just kind of read from the top of the data frame. And what I want to target is this content area div that I have at the bottom here. And then I just put those nav buttons in a div, and then I return that along with everything else that I wanted to see. So this is now agree.for. We're adding navigation button functionality. And here we see it. So now if I go forward, it changes all of the data. And if I go previous, it goes back. So this is great. So this gives me the ability to assess the data and then go to the next one, assess data, go to the next one. If I want to go for the next few, I'll use previous forward. If I'm jumping to something that's a couple hundred or so earlier, then I'll just pass the ID parameter in the URL. So that's this iteration. The next iteration now is going to start adding the actual scoring functionality for alignment. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to see if reading the score that the LLM judge scored and reading the explanation that it provided for that score, for this criterion, for this prompt completion pair, I'm going to either agree or disagree. So what I've done here is I've added an agree button and I've added a disagree button. And it's very similar to the previous and forward buttons. The target is content area. But now the difference is I'm going to need some way to store this in my CSV. So that introduces this agree method. And this agree method is at the agree route. It takes an integer and it takes a Boolean value of true or false. And then in my data frame, I have a agree column. And so I store the value of this agree value Boolean in the agree column, and I save the data frame. So every time I click this agree button, it's going to, for that index, for that row in the data frame, it's going to set that value of agree. For agree, it's agree equals true, and for disagree, it's agree equals false. And then I want two-way persistence. So when I render this button, I want it to be selected if row.agree is true, otherwise I don't want it to be selected. And then I want disagree to be selected if not row.agree is true. And then I added a little bit of a delay so that I could, kind of visually, it was a little nicer to see that navigation moving back and forth. Now the other thing that I want to highlight is that when agree gets called and it saves the data, it actually returns the next sequence or the next row because it increments the ID by 1 and it calls the item route, and the item route is what's rendering everything on our page. So the reason I did this is that when I'm clicking agree or disagree, just to speed up the iteration of the scoring, as soon as I click agree or disagree, it'll go to the next item, and now it gives me the next thing to score. So let's take a look at agree.5. And here we go. So for item 50, I had already clicked agree because I agree with this score and explanation. If we look at some other ones, eventually we'll see here's a disagree. I disagreed that this maintains consistent narrative flow. So clicking on either one of these will change the page. So if I click on disagree, it'll go to the next page. If I click on agree, it'll go to the next page or the next row. So that's like 99% of functionality. The last thing I added was I wanted a comment box so I could write down comments, because what I wanted to do, and I ended up doing after doing this alignment evaluation, is I took all the rows in my CSV which had a comment, and I formatted that into a text file, and I gave that to Claude, and I said, hey, let me know what trends you see in this text file. Let me know what are the things that I pointed out that I was going to change, what are the things that need to be improved, and so on. So I wanted to make sure I'm logging my comments, because then I'll have Claude evaluate my comments. So that brings us to the last file, which is agree.6. So for comments, I have a div with a header and then a text area block, and that's it, right? And then I'm returning that at this line down here. So what do I want in this text area? Well, I'm saving the comments in the field, the row, or the column in my data frame called comments. So if the length of this is greater than 0, so basically if there is a comment, then I want you to put the comment itself as the value in the text area. Otherwise, just give me an empty string. And then this is now a post method because it's, sending data that's going to be saved. And, you could argue that this should probably have been a post method as well. And then when it triggers is that when I key up and something has been changed and there's a half-second delay. So it's not constantly saving. So what does this post method do? It sends it to this ID/save comments route. So I have to create a function for that called save comments. Very similar to agree. It takes an ID and the value we want to store, and then it stores it in the data frame, and then it saves the data frame. Except in this case, we don't want any navigation, so it's just going to print in the terminal that it saved this comment for this ID. In agree, I wanted navigation because when I clicked agree or disagree, I wanted it to go to the next or previous row. But when I'm saving a comment, I don't want it to go to the next row when I key up for half a second. So this is agree 6. Let's take a look at it. Okay, and here it is. So if I go to one of these comments here, and let's say I just make a change here. Here we go, saving comments for ID 147, which it is here. Completion does not track, I would score 0.5 instead of 1.0. And then I make a change, key up, half a second, and we can see the comment is saved there. So this way I now can have some qualitative information that I'm storing for later analysis. So that's pretty much it. So 7 different iterations and seven kind of incremental development of the app. The final version is in my repo, the TinyScale Lab repo. It's called LLM Judge Agreement.py, and it relies on having this LLM Judge Score Agreement.csv, which is also in my repo here. So that's it for this video. This will, we'll see if there's more FastHTML apps that I need to create. for my tiny scale lab project, but so far I've created two and I've really enjoyed making them. And each time I understand something better, especially by making these videos. I'm really understanding this code a lot better. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.